Welcome everyone to our webinar this morning about the impaired driving landscape. We have an interesting cross-section of speakers who are going to share some context with you. So before we get started, for those of you not familiar with the Traffic Injury Research Foundation, we are an independent road safety research institute and registered charity based in Canada, although we do work in a number of countries around the world. Our main focus is road user behavior. So we certainly touch on vehicle safety technologies, a kind of a broader cross section of the transportation domain, but we come at it from an angle of road user behavior. So essentially, the different types of road users on the road and the different types of factors that can contribute to crashes are things that we look at TIRF. We collect medical examiner and coroner data and crash data from jurisdictions across the country. And Steve Brown, who is our research associate and data collection manager and longtime leader with respect to our national fatality database, will be talking about impaired driving fatal crashes today. That presentation will be followed by Milad Delavari, who is a research scientist who has a PhD in engineering, and he brings his sophisticated data analytic skills to the work that we do at TIRF. And he will be speaking about the findings and results from our 2025 road safety monitor with a specific focus on impaired driving prevalence. We're also very pleased to have Steve Sullivan, who is the CEO of MAD Canada, join us. He's been an important partner with respect to the impaired driving field, and he's going to be speaking about policing powers and some of the progress that's been achieved and some of the issues with respect to practice to provide some direction on that front. And lastly, we're going to hear from Hannah Barrett, who is a researcher and program manager who's been a key partner with the regional community workshops series that we have delivered in a number of jurisdictions across Canada. So she is going to take some of the context provided by Steve and Milad and Steve from MAD to talk about how that's playing out at a community level and what are some of the things that we learned as a result of the regional workshop series, but also some of the innovations coming out of those meetings and discussion and some of the tools that we're getting ready to release. I'd also like to thank Diageo North America, Desjardins Insurance, and Beer Canada, who have sponsored different pieces of work. The Road Safety Monitor series is sponsored by Beer Canada and Desjardins Insurance. The outcomes from the community workshops has been supported by Diageo North America, and then our work with our national fatality database and fatal crash data is sponsored by Desjardins Insurance. So thanks to all of our sponsors who have really made it possible for us to bring this webinar to you. So we are going to be taking questions in the chat as we go. So I've let our speakers know that there'll be a high sign for questions at some point through their presentation. We do like to take questions as we go simply because it's easier for speakers to address those issues in the moment as they're discussing them instead of waiting till the end. It's also can be a little bit frustrating to remember your question. So yeah, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. You're going to tell me if I missed anything.
Nope, you checked all the boxes, right? Steve's all ready to go.
Okay, so awesome. Karen is going to be providing support as host. She handles our communications and education programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to talk about our fatal crash data to start kind of setting the stage for the rest of the panel. So Steve, over to you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Robin, and thanks for everyone for taking part. I'm just going to share the screen here. And, oops, bear with me here. Oops. Okay. I'm going to talk about impaired driving fatal crashes in Canada. And just give you a quick overview about our national fatality database. Going to look at the prevalence of impaired driving fatal crashes in terms of both alcohol and drugs. We'll look at some trends, some of the characteristics you see in crashes related to drivers, vehicle type, and also going to look at the various drug types and polysubstance use. And I'll just do a quick summary of the findings and then throw out some potential future trends that we should be keeping an eye on.
So Steve,
Okay.
sorry to
So,
interrupt. We just actually can't see your presentation yet. So if you can go ahead and share your screen, that would be great. Or let me know if you'd like me to pop it up for you.
oh no, I thought I had shared it. I'm sorry.
We can see it now. Thanks, Steve. You can go ahead and go to presentation
Slideshow.
view.
I'm sorry.
We can see it. You can go ahead and switch to presentation view.
Okay, dokie. Sorry about that.
Excellent.
Okay.
You're all set.
Okay, good. Sorry about that, folks. I've been doing this for years, but still get really nervous presenting. Anyway, our fatality database, as mentioned, is the only Canadian source of both police report and coroner medical examiner data. And it's got about 165,000 cases. We have data for 7 provinces going back as far as 1973, and for all the jurisdictions is since 1987. So the data that we would receive from police reported collision data would be such variables as crash date, time, and location, what type of vehicles were involved, safety equipment, and whether or not the person was ejected. Now, when we get the data from the coroners and medical examiners, we receive information such as the death date and time, the cause of death, and then the toxicological information, the alcohol and drug test results. And we also look at it to see if there's any missing gaps that were in the police data. Sometimes the police data may not indicate whether or not the victim was ejected. So sometimes there's something in the narrative or in some other documents in the coroner's data we can use to supplement that. And in terms of alcohol, we're examining data from 2000 to 2023. Now, just a little caveat here. We don't have BC and Manitoba included in the national numbers. We don't have all the data yet for those two jurisdictions. So anything for Canada will not include those two provinces, but we hope to get that soon. So if you want to get in touch with me and follow up with that, please do. And there's two key indicators of the prevalence of alcohol and fatal crashes. One, of course, is the blood alcohol concentrations of the drivers that are killed. And the second one is we look at alcohol involved fatalities. Now, that would be one where at least one of the drivers in the crash had been drinking. That could be the driver that was killed, or it could be one of the surviving drivers. And we've had pretty consistent testing rates for alcohol use among fatally injured drivers. It's been between 84 and 88% for the last couple of decades. Now, when we look at alcohol-related fatalities, we have enough information on the dying driver and surviving driver to figure whether or not it's an alcohol-related fatality in almost 93% of the cases. And when we look at alcohol-related fatalities, one thing we should remember is in about 68% of those cases, the alcohol-related fatality is the drinking driver. And if we look at the number of drivers that tested positive for alcohol in 2023, it was 276, and that's down substantially from 387 back in 2000. However, um, even as recently as 2020, we only had 237 drivers test positive for alcohol. But of course, that was the first year of the pandemic, so that might have brought the numbers down a bit. Percentage-wise, we have seen a decrease in the percentage of drivers testing positive for alcohol. It was 30.8% in 2023, down from 34.6. But there again, as recently as 2021, the number that tested positive was as low as 28.8%. So it's crept up in the last couple of years. And here's a chart that illustrates what I just mentioned. The line is the number and the columns are the percentages. And you can see that there had been some progress made, but in the last few years, the percentage has not changed that much. And in fact, the number of drivers that tested positive has crept up since 2021. The second indicator I mentioned, alcohol-related fatalities, we had 473 in 2023, and that's considerably less than what we saw in 2000. But there again, since 2021, that's 100 additional alcohol-related fatalities. And percentage-wise, the percentage of fatalities involving alcohol, it's pretty well the same in 2023 as it was in 2000. But as recently as 2018, it had dropped down to 24.6%. And here again, you can see that there have been some progress made. If you look at the number of alcohol-related fatalities, it had been dropping for quite a while, but then since 2021, it started to move up again. And we also looked at drugs among fatally injured drivers and the role of drugs in fatalities. And when I talk about drugs, please note that I'm talking not just illicit drugs, but also prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs. And the testing rate for drugs, unfortunately, it's been greater in most recent years. But back in 2000, only about 35% of drivers that were killed had been tested for drugs. And we didn't see it reach the 80% testing rate threshold till a decade ago, back in 2013. So we had 469 fatally injured drivers tested positive for drugs in 2023. Now that's up substantially from the 162 in 2000, but remember what I said before about the testing rate being lower in 2000. And of course, the drivers testing positive, it's 53.5% in 2023 compared to only 35% in 2000. So here again, it could be that in 2000 you had fewer drivers being tested, and maybe they're being tested for fewer drug types. So you have to keep in mind the low testing rate, and that would explain why you've seen such a sharp increase from 2000 to 2023. But if we just concentrate at the last 4 or 5 years, we can see that progress has stalled in terms of the percentage of drivers testing positive for drugs. Now, a lot of you are going to wonder why I'm going to be talking about sharks here, but in recent years, shark sightings in Nova Scotia, they've increased. And you talk to people in Nova Scotia, and some say, well, there's more sharks offshore. And other people say, well, no, it's not more sharks. They've always been there. It's just that there's more observers. There's more people looking out for them. So I'm wondering if the same applies to drug impaired drivers, whether there's more out there or we just have more sophisticated means of finding them. What I did for the driver and vehicle characteristics, I just looked at the last 5 years. So for alcohol, as you may expect, males are more likely to test positive than females. And the 20 to 34 age group is the most likely to test positive. And if we look at vehicle type, as you might expect, a smaller percentage of tractor trailer drivers are positive for alcohol. And another traditional subgroup, drivers in single vehicle crashes, of course, they're more likely to test positive for alcohol than those in multi-vehicle crashes. And in this chart, you can see here it better illustrates the differences. So for age group, what I find interesting is the 35 to 49 group. Slightly more of them are testing positive for alcohol than those age 16 to 19. And as I did mention before, if you look on the very right, you can see for single vehicles, they're more than twice as likely to test positive for alcohol than drivers in multi-vehicle crashes. Also looked at the collision characteristics, and As might be expected, drivers in nighttime crashes are more likely to be drinking, and those in weekend crashes are more likely to test positive those in weekday crashes. And here again, this it shows up on the chart here. So for the time of day, you can see the 62.4% testing positive for alcohol between midnight and 3 a.m., the people that crash at that time of day. And you can sort of see that little valley effect where in the middle of the day, not as many drivers are positive for alcohol, and then it creeps up again in the evening hours. And as I mentioned earlier, weekend drivers are much more likely to test positive for alcohol than weekday drivers. Now, I looked at drugs for the last 5 years as well, and males were just slightly more likely to test positive than females. Again, the 20 to 34 age group is the most likely to test positive for drugs. And tractor trailer drivers, they're more likely, less likely to test positive than drivers of other vehicle types. So I did the same thing as I did with the alcohol positive drivers. And you can see that there are some differences here, but they're not as acute, like between males and females or between single vehicle and multi-vehicle. There's not the big difference that you see in the drivers testing positive for alcohol.
Steve,
Yes.
okay, so one question is there a threshold level to be considered to be positive? So can you just talk about the thresholds that we see in the different jurisdictions as a kind of big picture?
Yeah, if you're talking about BAC level, some places they won't put anything below 20, like or 0.02 milligrams. Others might have it down to like very minute amount, but generally speaking, anything smaller than zero point zero 0.01 in that can be considered negative. And the other thing I maybe should have talked about this is when we're looking at drivers testing positive or whatever, we always look to see if there's any indication that there might have been fermentation of the sample, because sometimes you can get an elevated reading for that. It's just because the sample was not properly preserved, and then we'll look at something else like urine or vitreous humor.
Okay. And then the other question was with respect to the types of drugs. Are you talking any drug or just drugs that can potentially produce impairment?
Yeah, we're talking about any types of drugs. I sometimes there can be 7 or 8 drugs listed, so I'll indicate all of those in our fatality database. And going forward, I'll mention that sometimes a person can test positive for more than one type of drug. One of the limitations sometimes is that the data will show that someone's positive for a drug, but it won't quantify like uh, how much of that drug was in the person's bloodstream.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so I'll just move on here to the bars, and here again you see the difference in drivers testing positive for drugs. And that valley I was showing you for alcohol that looked like a V, this is almost flat. It's a bit higher for nighttime. And then if you look at the difference between weekdays and weekends, drivers in the weekend crashes are only slightly more likely to test positive for drugs than those in weekday crashes. And if we look at the types of drugs tested, of course, we had cannabis was legalized in October 2018 on a recreational basis. And prior to that, the 5 years prior to that, we had about 23% of drivers positive for cannabis. And since then, that percentage has increased to 27.7%. So what I've done here is I've shown the pre-legal period and the post-legal period, plus the percent testing positive for each of the years. So while we've had a higher percentage of drivers testing positive for cannabis in the post-legal period, you can see that since 2020, the percent testing positive has inched down. It's gone from 31.4% down to 25.2%. And excluding alcohol, of course, cannabis would be the most commonly found substance in the blood of fatally injured drivers. But we also find CNS depressants, that would be your benzodiazepines, for example, in 20%, and then 20% also for the CNS stimulants such as methamphetamines, amphetamines, cocaine. And we also looked at polysubstance use. So 19% of the drivers that are killed that we test um, are positive for alcohol and at least one other drug. And 12% were positive for alcohol and cannabis. And then we even found almost 9% that were positive for alcohol and CNS stimulants. So to summarize, we have seen a general increase in the percentage of drivers who have been drinking and also alcohol-related fatalities. But in the last 3 or 4 years, those trends they've either reversed or stalled. And I did talk about the traditional subgroups, the younger drivers, male drivers, drivers at night, the weekend drivers. And there's more of those that are testing positive for alcohol. In drugs, you're seeing that too, but the difference is they're not as convincing as you would see for alcohol. And I also mentioned that the 16 and 19-year-olds are less likely to test positive for alcohol and drugs than the 20 to 34-year-olds and the 35 to 49-year-olds. So I don't know if that's something that's going to keep happening or whether it's just a bit of a blip that we've seen in the last few years. And also mentioned about cannabis found among fatally injured drivers, how the percentage has gone down since 2020, but it's still a pretty small window. We're going to have to look at that for a few more years to see where that's going. So, will the post-pandemic landscape result in more drivers drinking and driving? Will we see the teenage drivers drink and drive more frequently or less frequently? What will happen to the percentage of drivers testing positive for cannabis? Is it going to increase, decrease? Where's that going? And also the percentage of CNS stimulant positive drivers. I've noticed that since cannabis was legalized, for whatever reason, there was a larger percentage of drivers testing positive, like for cocaine and amphetamine. So I'm wondering if that's going to be an ongoing trend.
Okay. Steve, I've got a couple of questions for you here.
Absolutely.
One is, so has cannabis testing not changed drastically in the past decade? And then how confident are you in the accuracy of the drug data versus the alcohol related data?
Well, there's as I mentioned before, one of the limitations of the drug data is in some instances it's not quantified. Now there are certain drugs, for example, like ketamine. It can be used recreationally, but it's often used in a hospital setting. So whenever I see that, I'll look at it and see whether that's something that was administered at the hospital. So um, if there's instances where that's documented, I feel very confident that we were right to either include or exclude specific drugs. But there might be some other instances where I'm a little bit less confident about that.
But overall, the quality of the drug testing data has improved dramatically in the last,
Yes,
10
I,
years.
I'd say yeah, I'd say since about 2013. If we go back to 2000, there were some jurisdictions where drivers were tested for drugs just as routinely as they were tested for alcohol, whereas in other jurisdictions, the testing was not as rigorous and it wasn't done as routinely. But
Right, and that's often why when we produce the fatal drug fact sheets, we focus more on the last, 5 to 7 years as opposed to, the last decade or the last 2 decades, just because it gives us a cleaner snapshot. Another question that was asked is whether there's a province that is just higher in terms of rates of impaired by alcohol versus drug per capita. Um, Obviously, as you'd noted, we're currently still in the process of collecting the BC and the Manitoba data, so you've kind of aggregated
yeah.
accordingly. But just overall, big picture, do you see some jurisdictions with higher rates per capita of fatals than others?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to say which ones? Because I don't feel comfortable saying that. I don't want to I don't want to drug shame any particular jurisdictions out there, so I don't think I will.
Yeah, and I think that's what the alcohol crash report can talk about,
That's
right?
correct.
Okay, awesome. So another question is the lower rate for 16 to 19-year-olds compared to your 35 to 39-year-olds. Is that due potentially as a result of the graduated driver licensing programs that we see? I know certainly
That's
with respect to alcohol.
that is possible. We do like with GDL, there are certain restrictions on when a person can drive. There's the zero alcohol provision, number of passengers, and the other consideration too is uh, you know younger people. Some of them are getting their license later, like they're not getting it at 16 anymore. So some of them might be waiting until they're, in their 20s or even 30s, for
Yeah.
example, before they get licensed. So,
And I
um,
think that raises an
yeah,
interesting point, Steve. I know for some of the analyses you've done, certainly for presentations that I've done, is you see a clear distinction in lower rates or lower prevalence of risky behaviors among your 16 to 19-year-olds, really with the exception of distraction, compared to, your 20 to 24-year-olds. So you see kind of that safety behavior in the 16 to 19 range, but once they turn 2021, you see that risky behavior in fatals. For that slightly older age cohort, you see a bit of a dramatic shift. So I think that tells us something important about um, the importance of sustaining the prevention messaging and the safety strategies, even once they exit a GDL program. I think there's certainly more work to be done there.
yeah, that's certainly a possibility. Like that 20 to 34 group. We were at ICAT's conference in Portugal, and there were some other countries that were reporting that particular age group, had higher than average, levels of alcohol and drug involvement. So it's not just here in Canada.
Yeah. Okay, so two last questions before we move on to the next presentation. One of the questions was how do you decide impairment in illicit versus prescribed drugs? And I think the important caveat there is we're not talking about impairment, we're talking about presence. Is that
Yeah,
correct,
we're
Steve?
Yes, we are talking about the presence. That's why I was saying alcohol involved rather than alcohol related. Um, sometimes a person can have a residual amount of a drug, or it might be the metabolite of a drug that sort of, stays in the blood for a while, but it might not necessarily affect their driving. So, anyway, I just have one more. You've been very patient. You guys have listened to a lot of numbers thrown around, so. Just want some final holiday numbers for you. What has 27 actors, three settings, two writers, and one plot? 671 Hallmark Christmas movies. So, anyway, if anyone else has any questions about that number or any other numbers in my presentation, feel free to get in touch. Thanks
Yeah.
very much.
Thanks, Steve. Just one last quick question. The proportion of fatals involving under '08 versus over '08, it's quite a small percentage. That's
Yeah. If we look at drivers that were killed, um, I'd say 80% of drivers that are positive for alcohol are, zero point zero 0.08 and above. And within that group, you're going to find a substantial number that are more than double.
yeah,
And if we look at the average BAC of drinking drivers, it's sometimes like 0.17. So, these aren't people that are sort of teetering at the very edge of either the criminal code limit or the administrative limit. Okay.
yeah. Awesome. Thanks very much, Steve. I
Okay. Thanks
appreciate
very much.
that. Awesome. I'm going to turn it over to Milad, who's going to talk about our road safety monitor poll data. Again, happy to take questions. If you go to the Q&A button at the bottom and pop your question in the chat, we'll do our best to get to as many as possible. So over to you, Milad.
Thanks, Robin, for introducing me, and thanks see for the presentation. Can you see my full screen mode?
Yes, you're good to go, Milad.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, thanks Steve for the presentation. I think and it's good to link to the fatality database that you mentioned about the post-pandemic landscape that we are facing. And I think this road safety monitoring that I'm going to explain is going to explain and going to give a picture about the prevalence of impaired driving, especially for the post-pandemic landscape in Canada. So I'm going to talk about the prevalence of self-reported alcohol-involved driving behavior. Also evaluate whether we have a trend or shifts in impaired driving from 2004 to 2025, and also see the contextual characteristics behind drinking and driving in Canada, and see which demographic predictors can impact on the outcome of drinking and driving. So briefly talk about the RSM. TIRF has conducted this annual road safety monitoring survey since 2000. And it covers a variety of topics in road safety, covering and tracking Canadian behavior, attitudes, and opinions about the road safety. However, I want to mention that impaired driving has been always a topic each year. And thanks for our sponsors, Desjardins and Beer Canada, for this project and supporting us. So the RSM and what today I'm going to talk about is mostly focused on the alcohol usage and self-reported alcohol impaired driving behavior, and also know how is the perceived risk and seriousness among Canadians regarding drinking and driving. And the sample size for the 2025 this year was 1,500 respondents. Regarding the analysis techniques, we use a variety of techniques, for example, descriptive analysis to evaluate the demographic characteristics of our participants, like their age, their sex. Also, visualize the trend and see the trend and shifts for our variables, and also benefiting piecewise linear model regression and logic regression models to, first of all, for example, identify whether we have a trend, gradual trend, or whether we have a change over a study period, and see whether we can link them to like some events like pandemics. And also the logic regression models also be used to, first of all, see which predictors can impact or associated with driving over any amount of alcohol, or the other model that we used was about evaluating predictors that associated with driving over the legal alcohol limit. And both of these models, the outcome was binary, yes or no. So regarding the demographic analysis and how, for example, sex or age distributed among our respondents, we see that the sex balance improved during time. And for this year, almost 50% of our respondents were male and 50% were female. And regarding the distribution of respondents among different age categories, we see a really good distribution, especially from 25 years old to 79. Also, we have a good representative for those who are under 25 years old, and also a few percentage for those who are more than 80 years old. 81% of our respondents came from urban area, and 19% were coming from rural area. 21% coming from jurisdictions with fewer than 100,000 populations, and 79% coming from jurisdictions with 100,000 people or more. And 69% of our respondents said they drive under 1,000 kilometers per month, and 31% they said each month they drive over 1,000 kilometers. Here we see the trend regarding the concern about drinking and driving among our participants. So this figure, which was collected from 2005 to 2025, so it's over 20 years. It shows the proportion of Canadians who consider drinking and driving a very or extremely serious problem in 2020. For example, in 2025, I can say that this percent reached to its lowest point in the last 2 decades, around 72%, around 4% decline compared to 2024. So on the other perspective, we can say that 3 out of 10 respondents seeing drinking and driving not a major issue. And what is impacting on the impaired driving? So we see that in 2025, when we ask the participants about whether you drove after consuming any amount of alcohol within 2 hours in the past 30 days, we see that more than 1 in 6 respondents, so around 15%, they are saying that they drove after consuming alcohol in 2025. Which, when we compare it to the last year, which was around 11%, so we are seeing around 4% increase. And also, piecewise linear regression model shows that from 2005 to 2010, we had an increasing trend in driving after any amount of alcohol, after using any amount of alcohol. And we can see here this red line, but after that, we had 2 consecutive decreasing trend from 2011 to 2015 and 2017 to 2024. So what is here our concern is, again, seeing a re-emergence of another increasing trend that happened from 2005 to 2010. Because there is a shift of increasing trend from 2024 to this year. Also, when we ask the participants that whether you drove after using alcohol when it's over the legal limit, so actually driving within 2 hours when they thought they were over the legal limit within the past year, we see that 1 in 10 respondents reported driving when they believed they were over the legal limit within the past year. So again, concerning of re-emergence of upward trend that occurred between 2015 to 2020, as we are seeing here. And when we compare this year to 2023 or 2024, we almost see the numbers are doubled. So from 5%, 5.8% to 9%, more than 9%. So it's a concerning trend that we are seeing this year. Also, this figure shows the blue line actually shows that the number of police reported alcohol impaired driving from 2017 to 2024, and also drivers who drove when they thought they were over the legal limit with the orange line. From 2017 to 2022, we see more or less these 2 variables, they had the same up and down. Just noting that these data were used to explore year-by-year changes over time. But in the last 3 years, we are not seeing the same trend as I mentioned earlier. So this is showing us that this relationship between these 2 variables is not fixed, and enforcement might serve as a useful indicator of the prevalence, but it cannot be assumed to track self-reported in all the study periods. So it also shows that there is no single measures that can tell us the whole story. So we need to understand a variety of factors behind this trend or violation. Also, when we ask those who drove when they confirmed driving over the legal limit, when they ask them that where did you use the drinking, and for example, the options was bar, restaurant, and etc., we are seeing that the post-pandemic trend is showing, and mostly we are coming back to what we had before the pandemic. So for example, here, I can say that those who drink at bar, we had an increase from 11% to 27% when we compare this year to the last year. The same trend more or less happened for restaurant by increasing from 16% to 23%. And when we look at the place when people drinking at their own home, so in the pandemic, most, or let's say significant percentage was allocated when people drinking at their own place. But this year, we are seeing a significant drop from 44 or 46% in 2024 or 2023 to just 60%. And also when we ask those group that with whom you drinking and then after that you drove. So we noticed that 2 in 5 people who reported drinking when they saw they were over the legal limit, they actually drank with their close friends. And we are seeing that it substantially increased from 27% in 2024 to 39% in 2025. So it's a substantial increase actually. And then we are looking at drinking alone. So again, like the previous slide, we are seeing a drop from 43% to 26%. So people are not anymore drinking alone or at home as what we had during the pandemic, for example. And now they are tends to drinking with their close friends, social gathering at bars or restaurants. Also, we had two actually logic model. The first model, we wanted to evaluate the impact of age and sex on driving when they were over, when they use any amount of alcohol actually. So we see that as the age is increasing, the impaired driving is decreasing. By 10 years, increasing the age, the impaired driving decreasing, and also female respondents were 46% less likely to report driving after consuming any amount of alcohol. And also driving over the legal alcohol limit when they exceed the legal limit. So we noticed that also each 10 years increase in the age is associated with 32% decrease in impaired driving. And more or less, we are seeing the same trend in 2023 and 2024. So all in all, we are getting close to the vacation. So we need to take care that alcohol impaired driving is rebounded sharply in this year. Around 15% reported driving after any amount of alcohol, and around 9% reported driving while they thought they were over the legal limits. Also, when we ask the respondents about public concern about drinking and driving, now we are seeing a decline. It's the lowest point over the last 2 decades. And also we are seeing the post-pandemic landscape regarding social pattern that it's gonna impact on the risk of impaired driving. And also, although police reported data were informative and were in line with our drinking and driving numbers, but specifically the last 3 years, we are seeing no longer closely track prevalence. Thank you so much. You can meet us at TIRF.ca. And also, if you have any questions offline, you can reach out to me.
Yep. So there's two quick questions, Milad. One was with respect to concern. When we ask people about concern, we're asking them about their perceptions of safety and their perceptions of risk. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. So when we ask about how much they are concerned, specifically, we are asking about their perceived risk and their concern about the impaired driving. Yes.
Okay. And then the other question that came up was when we ask people when they're driving, when they feel like they're over the legal limit, because there are changes that Steve Sullivan's going to talk about in a minute with respect to mandatory alcohol screening. Are we expecting to see a shift perhaps in how people make those assessments, knowing that the likelihood of being stopped or the likelihood of detection is higher as a result of mandatory alcohol screening? Do you think we've seen an increase because they're less concerned about being stopped? That's why we're seeing kind of that bit of an increase in prevalence. And are we expecting it might go down with more mandatory alcohol screening?
Yes, I think first of all, we need to look at the issue regarding a multidisciplinary approach. But as you mentioned, mandatory programs definitely can impact on reducing these percentage, and probably these years when we are talking about the mandatory program levels and the enforcement levels that goes down. So probably these are some idea behind the increasing of the percentage of drinking and driving over the legal limit.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much, Milad. We appreciate that. And I believe our road safety monitor was released yesterday. So if you're interested in taking a look at the report that Milad talked about, that's available on our website. And with that, I'm going to shift gears and turn it over to Steve Sullivan to talk a little bit about policing powers and some of the new tools and what we're seeing on that front. So again, if you have questions, please go to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and pop your questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. So with that, over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Robin. And, I really appreciate you inviting us to be a part of this important conversation. I am going to confess that I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because the previous speakers all had really great data. It was really cool for people to process. I don't have any of that, so I apologize for that, but hopefully there's enough in here to keep you interested. Just real quickly, our mission at MAD Canada is to stop impaired driving. And I know that we share that mission with TIRF and many other road safety organizations. But we also provide support to people who've been impacted by impaired driving. So people who've lost loved ones, and sadly, people who've been injured, sometimes catastrophically, because of someone else's choice to drive impaired. Just real brief, we obviously have a partnership with our MAD US counterparts. We're separate organizations. They started in 1980. We had some small organizations that were operating in the 80s and 90s, and eventually led to the formation of MAD Canada. And we're now a registered charity with about 100 chapters across the country, with probably anywhere from 1,000 volunteers, give or take. So we're very blessed to have so many people who are committed to our mission and obviously share your dedication to road safety. Our areas of focus, quick again, victim services. So that's victims and survivors. Public awareness. You've probably seen some of our public service announcements. Youth education. We have a program where we deliver a little film and some testimonials to thousands of students across the country every year, high school students. We just to pick up on a comment or a conversation that Robin and Steve were having, we've struggled with the college and university students, and I think you can see that's clearly a group that we need to make sure we continue that education. Public policy, so I'm going to touch on a couple of areas today, and our technology, obviously, Some you may be aware advances of in-car technology that it increases our safety, and included in that is technology being developed to detect and deter impaired driving. So the two issues I wanted to talk to today are mandatory alcohol screening. So I'll just refer to that as MAS. And after MAS, I'll talk about immediate roadside prohibition, which we'll refer to as IRP. So I don't want to belabor it. Many of you are familiar with MAS. It was brought in 2018, Bill C-46, which was almost a complete rewrite of our impaired driving laws, some enhancements for drug impaired driving enforcement, and brought in mandatory alcohol screening, which from our perspective is one of the most important safety measures that we've seen in a long time. Other countries have had MAS for a lot longer than Canada has, and have seen positive results in terms of reduced injuries or death. Now, the success of MAS, and I'll talk a little bit about this towards the end, depends largely on how much it's used and how much it's publicized. So in some jurisdictions where you see police test about 1/3 of all licensed drivers, and it's a highly publicized program, that has an impact on people's decision making. So people are less likely to drive impaired. So we have the law, and I'll just touch a little bit in a minute on where we are with that. We believe it can be a significant deterrent impact, again, if it's used to its potential and people are aware of it. We just had some preliminary polling. We haven't analyzed it yet, but more people are aware of MAS than I thought. It's not where we want it to be, but knowledge of it is increasing, which I think is really important. So MAS, for those of you who don't know, really just allows any police officer who does a lawful traffic stop. So if you ran a red light, or you're speeding, or police stops you at a sobriety check, they don't have to form any suspicion that you are impaired by alcohol. They can just demand that you provide a sample in their approved screening device. So officer pulls you over for speeding, walks up, says, hey, you were going 20 kilometers over the speed limit, and while we're here, I'm going to have you blow into this device. Obviously, they have a script, but it removes the requirement that police have that suspicion, because it's really hard to detect impaired drivers. Certainly people who are staggering can barely form a sentence, but people who are closer to the 0.08, 0.10, or experienced drinkers, it's really hard for police officers in those really quick moments they're interacting with a member of the public to form that suspicion. So MAS removes all of that and just allows police officers to technically demand it of any driver that they lawfully stop. It's really important from our perspective that police use this, we believe, at every lawful traffic stop. It came in 2018, and obviously there's a lag time between when a law is brought in and when it's fully applied. Obviously, you need training and awareness about the law. And then obviously in Canada, we went into situations, as everywhere else did with the pandemic, that police were maybe not wanting to test as many drivers as, certainly using this kind of tool, a new tool like this. So there has been a bit of delay in the full implementation of MAS. I think we're getting better. Certainly Alberta is a jurisdiction where officers use it quite a lot, quite consistently. And that's positive. And we see in other jurisdictions, police services will individually make choices. I went to Saskatchewan a couple of months ago and was told the RCMP there was using it 100% or close to 100%. We see in the Greater Toronto area, the OPP, at every lawful traffic stop they're using it. So we are seeing a pickup in many jurisdictions, but we're not where we'd like to be yet. There's still, I think, some awareness. Obviously, police resources is an issue that we can maybe talk a little bit about. So we're getting better. But I think to really be as effective as you were saying earlier, Robin, we need to make sure that it's being used as much as possible and that people are aware it's being used as much as possible. When MAS was brought in, there were a lot of concerns raised by the defense bar and constitutional advocates that it was a violation of people's rights. To date, It's been upheld every time it's been challenged, and there's been a number of challenges to that. I do believe that it's gone to the Court of Appeal, I think twice in Saskatchewan. So I do believe that they're seeking leave to appeal to the Supreme Court in at least one of those cases. We don't know yet if the Supreme Court will hear that. But Robin, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So one of the questions was with respect to off-road vehicles. So an off-road vehicle report that TIRF recently published looking at fatalities showed high impairment rates among off-road vehicle users. And I know we see that that's kind of not a new problem. That's a long-standing problem where the prevalence of fatals involving alcohol in off-road vehicles is higher than you see for passenger vehicles. So quick question, and if you don't know the answer, maybe we have a police officer on the call who can type an answer in the Q&A for us. Just is mass being used for off-road vehicles, and is MAD looking at any work in that area to encourage mass to be applied to off-road vehicles in any capacity? I think it's an area that's not enough addressed.
Yeah, no, you're right. One of the challenges we have is that we don't have a lot of data on how and when police are using it. So my guess is, and hopefully there's someone on who can maybe provide some more context, that it's not being used very much in terms of off-road vehicles. Doesn't mean it shouldn't, and obviously, we want to see it used as much. We haven't specifically addressed as an organization that particular issue because I think it's still getting buy-in from police leaders about using it on the roads, but certainly an area that needs attention. I will say we have recommended to the government, because you can't use it on vessels or personal boats.
Yeah.
So that's an area where we've recommended that the government expand the use of mass. We've also recommended it be used after collisions. So police can use it proactively. They pull you over, they can use it. But if they come upon a crash, they can't use mass. They have to have reasonable suspicion to do any kind of testing.
Yeah.
But I think an important question.
Yep. And I think to your point, Steve, one of the things that we've heard anecdotally, which Hannah will talk a little bit about, is really that it's a bit of a chicken and the egg, and police services are really working hard on the administrative side to start tracking tasks and to have a better understanding of kind of who's positive. I think we have a comment in here from Chad in the Q&A that says the adoption of mass is dependent on the police service. Adoption by traffic units is very high, but not as high by general duty, and police are not generally patrolling off-road areas, which would mean lower mass rates. So thanks very much for that, Chad. And to your point, Steve, definitely agree. It's an area where we need more attention and more support for police services to facilitate some data so that we have a better understanding of where and how it's being used, and what are some of the outcomes of that.
Yeah, and I think to Chad's point too, this in many ways comes down to individual police leadership, right? So if a leader of a particular police service wants it to happen, that's going to have an impact on how much it does. So it's really important that we get the leadership from our chiefs. And yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on to immediate roadside prohibition. Some jurisdictions call it immediate roadside suspensions. Alberta calls it immediate roadside suspension fail. I'm just going to use IRP because that's sort of was the first term that was used and sort of the more common one. For those of you not familiar with IRP, it is a provincial law, so it's not in every jurisdiction, but it allows a police officer to process an impaired driver at roadside. So a driver who is at a criminal level of impairment, so 0.08 or higher, but process that driver through a provincial/administrative scheme, as opposed to arresting, charging, bringing back to the station. So you have a driver who is, under our current system, a driver who's at the criminal level. And in Ontario, for example, where we don't have IRP, that officer, does all the work, brings that individual back to the police station, does 2 tests on the big device, processes all the charges. That can take 3 to 4 hours for that officer. So that means that officer is off the road for 3 to 4 hours. Under IRP, it's all done at roadside, kind of like they would do now with the warn range, so 0.05, how you would process that kind of case. You would do it all at roadside. The longest part of that might be waiting for the tow truck to come, 30 to 40 minutes versus 3 to 4 hours. British Columbia brought this in 2010. They saw a pretty significant drop in deaths and injuries. Now, as a caveat, want to acknowledge that was part of a broader package of safety reform. So I'm not suggesting that IRP is responsible for the entirety of their drops in deaths and injuries, but I think has had an impact. They also did a lot of publicity around it as well, so that was important. Since then, we've seen 4 other jurisdictions bring it in, so Alberta, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. New Brunswick just started in January 2025. And the Yukon isn't in place yet. They're still writing the regulations. But they have IRP laws, and they all look a little bit different because they are provincial laws, and they can sort of craft them all a little bit differently. We do expect to see 2 to 3 other jurisdictions move towards an IRP system in the next year or so. Provinces can design their own system, and there are differences. So these are kind of what we believe. We believe that individuals who are processed under immediate roadside prohibition should only have one chance. So if you are a repeat offender, you should then proceed to a criminal charge. Obviously, in no jurisdiction, if there is any harm to anybody or death or significant property damage, that it's not considered. In some jurisdictions where a driver refuses to provide a sample, they'll proceed criminally. And other factors might be if the person was racing, so street racing and impaired, you would proceed criminally. If they had a passenger under the age 18, so a child in the car, you were a professional driver, you were driving a commercial vehicle, or you have no license or an invalid license or it's suspended. So jurisdictions can impose limits on how they allow their officers to apply our IRP. British Columbia, which was the first, is kind of more wide open than Manitoba, for example. Manitoba is a little stricter. But again, provinces can figure out in territories what works for them, what they need, and craft that system appropriately. These are kind of where we fall as an organization, what we talk to provinces about. We believe that the penalties under an IRP system should be meaningful and they should target the person's behavior. So roadside suspensions, ignition interlocks, vehicle impoundments, remedial programs, and then of course there'll be fees and fines associated with all of those. The real difference in processing under an IRP and the criminal system is you don't get a criminal record under the IRP system. And there's not a lot of evidence. I mean, I don't know if there's any evidence that suggests that the criminal record in and of itself is a deterrent. We know that's the thing that people will fight most often in court. And so that can, cause delays in the court system. And the other thing with IRP is it's immediate and it's again, we believe severe. Whereas in the criminal system, you'll be charged. You might go to court depending on what jurisdiction you are 6 months down the road. If you're in Ontario these days, there's a good chance that will be pled down to a Highway Traffic Act offense, so you won't get a criminal record anyway. Other jurisdictions I know are facing severe delays in their system. So there's always doubt if you go the criminal route, what actually will happen with that particular individual. So quickly, I'll go through the benefits, and then I'm going to talk about some of the concerns that people have, because no system is completely perfect, and there's always pros and cons. You can process drivers a lot quicker under an IRP, 30 to 40 minutes versus 3 to 4 hours. That's a significant amount of time. That officer can be back out on the road, either looking for more dangerous or impaired drivers, responding to 911 calls, all those, quicker processing cases at sobriety checks. So that's a real significant, we believe, significant factor in allowing police to identify and remove more impaired drivers from the road. And that's really, from my perspective, the best part of an IRP system is you can get more drivers off the road. Obviously, what happens after that is really important, and we don't want to lose sight of that. But, going a criminal route means you're going to get fewer of those drivers off the road. Charges, again, depending on your jurisdiction, can take 6 months or longer. There's no guarantee about what's going to happen in our current system. Cases can be pled down. There can be stays. The IRP system removes the courts and the crowns and defense lawyers from the entire process. So it also saves the criminal justice system tons of resources, which means crowns can focus on those cases that involve an injury or a death, or involve other violent crimes like sexual assault. We've seen some stats from Statistics Canada recently about the number of cases that are being thrown out, the number of sexual assaults. So it's really important as a society that we focus our criminal justice system on those cases that really require that amount of time. Again, refers to the backlog that crowns have that time to focus on those cases that require more time, that you do want to see cases proceed through the criminal justice system. But there are, people have raised concerns about IRP. People worry about the message that we might be sending impaired drivers. We've, as an organization, others have as well, fought really hard that impaired driving is taken seriously by the courts. And are we undermining that message if we go to an IRP system and allow people not to have a criminal record? We think the message that's being sent is still quite severe and has an impact on someone's life, but it also sends that message out that you're more likely to get caught. And when you combine IRP with mandatory alcohol screening, we think that's really important. And we think that is a really good combination of police powers that, when used appropriately, can have a real impact on people's perception of getting caught. I've heard from police officers in jurisdictions that have IRP that use masks, that their officers are more likely to test people because, using masks, but also they know they're not going to have to go to court in 6 months and see a case be pled down or dropped. They know that those sanctions are going to be immediate and meaningful. So that's a really important factor as well. People don't get a criminal record. That's absolutely true. Again, there's no evidence that having a criminal record is any kind of special deterrent. But under the process that we would recommend, if you are a repeat offender, and obviously if you've caused injury or death and any of these other factors, you would still be processed under the criminal system. I've heard that police, concerns that police officers could lose the experience of preparing criminal cases and testifying in court, and that's a legitimate concern. Again, under our system, there are limits on when we would use this, and I'm going to show you the one slide I have with statistics. I just want to highlight how it may not be as serious a problem as we might think it could be, because there will still be cases that are processed through the criminal process. And again, in Ontario, and I'm sure it's in other jurisdictions, a lot of cases are being pled down to Highway Traffic Act or provincial offenses. So police are not getting that experience in court anyway. And then the concern that government may have to create an expensive new appeal process, because even under an IRP, people have the right to appeal that. It is a quick and efficient appeal process. It should be meaningful, certainly much cheaper than the criminal justice system. And really, most jurisdictions, every jurisdiction except Quebec has a provincial or territorial warn range, so 0.05 or 0.04. So they have appeal processes already. So it would just be really an expansion of those programs. These are stats from Winnipeg, about 5 years after they brought in IRP. And we had done a lunch and learn earlier this year, and these stats were presented. So you can see that IRP, the number of IRP cases processed significantly went up over that 5-year period, but the number of criminal cases didn't drop considerably. And that's because Manitoba has a pretty well-defined program. So again, if there's a child in the car, if you're speeding, all those, if you're racing, all those other elements. And so I think what this reflects is the fact that there's still a lot of cases being processed in the criminal case. But these other individuals, these 215, these are people who might not have been tested if we just had the criminal record. And so from my perspective, you're taking twice as many drivers off the road, and you're not increasing the burden to the criminal justice system. And you're still holding those that a province deems worthy accountable through a criminal process. This is where you can contact us and find us. And again, just really appreciate the chance to be a part of this important discussion.
Great. Thanks so much, Steve. Just one additional comment from Stephen about mass was, it's really important that we have clarity around what's being tracked and how it's being tracked. Agencies are currently tracking uh, have different traffic tracking methods dependent on, how many times it's been used versus, how many traffic stops it's been used. And, I think the capacity issues that police services generally struggle with is an important factor. But I think it's an issue that warrants monitoring as we move forward. And again, your points about the IRP program are well taken. Jurisdictions have had the administrative roadside regime for a lot of years. We've seen several evolutions to really ramp up those programs and make them more substantive and benefit from the swiftness. But to your point, Steve, I think parameters around how it's being used, and kind of some of the alternatives that are being considered in court. I know in Ontario they plead dangerous, right? Still a criminal offense, but it's about driving behavior, not driver condition. So I think monitoring of those issues is really critical as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah to talk about our community workshops. And we did this project really as a touch point to check in with smaller and medium-sized communities in regions to just identify what's changed with respect to impaired driving and what's the current landscape look like from communities and things that can benefit them. So with that, over to you, Hannah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so these regional workshops that I'm going to be talking about today, they were made possible through our partnership with Diageo North America, who we have partnered with to develop the Impaired Driving Coalition of Canada. So this coalition combines knowledge and expertise of our member organizations to guide the development of a national action plan to reduce impaired driving. And our objective is to raise public awareness and address how the impaired driving problem has changed over time and to give voice to community concerns. And this is some of the members who are involved in the coalition. We have a very wide variety of people involved, which is great. We have a lot of different points of view and expertise. So we developed a national action plan with 4 priority areas of focus. So the first, prevention. These activities that we do are designed to empower communities to utilize local data sources to increase their understanding of the characteristics of the local impaired driving problem, which can ideally provide a clear direction with respect to prevention opportunities within their own community. Education promotes activities that are focused on developing more customized alcohol and drug educational messaging in response to the characteristics of different audiences, such as youth, adults, people living in rural areas, and reaching them through various mediums. We know, Steve touched on this, that a major barrier for motivating action to reduce impaired driving is the lack of current or comprehensive data sources to demonstrate the magnitude of the problem. So with the data piece of the National Action Plan, we aim to identify and compile current local sources of impaired driving data, aim to aspire action for change. And then lastly, technology. We identify more efficient ways to sustain impaired driving enforcement, which is essential in order to maintain the deterrent effects of laws and penalties. In an era of dwindling police resources, we've seen the elimination of traffic units, competing priorities among officers. Police officers need tools to sustain the consistency and the efficiency of impaired driving enforcement. So we completed 4 one-day regional community impaired driving workshops within the past year. We hosted in Saanich, British Columbia, Prince Albert in Saskatchewan, North Bay, Ontario, and Saint-Norbert in Quebec. So the point of these meetings, these workshops, or to learn about the community experiences they have with tackling impaired driving. So what are the trends they are finding, and are they in line with national trends? What have they tried that has worked, or what have they tried that has failed? And how can we use those experiences to move forward in reducing impaired driving? We wanted to, based on their experiences, create tools to overcome the shared challenges and help build public awareness and engagement across communities. It was also nice to share with other communities that everyone always thinks they're alone and that their community has this problem and it must be unique. But it may seem discouraging, but a lot of the times that's not true and everyone's having the same problem. So by sharing those lessons learned, communities know they're not alone in addressing this issue, and we can move forward in trying to help them. So like I said, we completed this in 4 communities, and over all the workshops, we had about 40 medium-sized and small rural communities in attendance. And the attendees included a pretty wide variety of practitioners. We had local officials, law enforcement, public health, first responders, trauma staff, school educators, tribal members, and local advocates. Our agenda consisted of facilitated discussion. We started by presenting the most recent research and fatality data that we have on impaired driving, as well as our RSM that Milad discussed, because that's more current public opinion data. And then we got into a discussion about, what the trends are in their community, what they're seeing, what they're trying. So based on these workshops, we had 6 key takeaways that were consistent across the community. So these are things that everyone is experiencing in some capacity. So the first is that communities no longer have the same resources, capacity, or the tools to deliver prevention in ways that worked previously. And this is partially due to the fact that partnerships that existed pre-pandemic are no longer functioning or sustainable because of funding and staffing cuts, and the inadequate capacity within agencies. There's insufficient resources and overall low engagement. The pandemic required a lot of specifically government to shift their priorities to a more health-based and public health, which kind of put impaired driving on the back burner, and some communities have not been able to put impaired driving back on the forefront of people's minds. We know we need a more holistic look at impaired driving. We need to reassess the context instead of simply relying on quantitative data, which isn't a good measure of prevalence. So for example, excuse me, the most recent fatality data we have is up to 2023, but that's 2 years, almost 3 years old at this point. And that's largely just, the result of the time lags in getting the data. The data is not accessible, and collecting it, analyzing it, and then publishing it. So looking at qualitative resources can be a better measure of impaired driving. Looking at numbers, it seems that impaired driving may be declining, but we aren't asking the right questions to get a complete picture. Charges of impaired driving might be down because enforcement is down due to, like I already mentioned, conflicting priorities, staffing, etc. And in some areas, like Steve Sullivan just discussed, pleas have shifted in some jurisdictions. So you can be charged with impaired driving, but then you plead to reckless or dangerous, and then that wouldn't be counted as impaired driving in the statistics. There needs to be changes in the available tools for police and efficiencies. So some of these things were put in place to alleviate the burden on the justice systems, which may have been made with good intentions, but now they're becoming normalized. Some without guardrails, and this can unintentionally send the wrong message about impaired driving. Again, the pleading down to a reckless, it seems impaired driving is not that bad because it's a Highway Traffic Act charge versus a criminal charge. We need to review youth strategies. They should be more tailored and more specific to that population. Steve mentioned this as well. There are fewer opportunities, and it's hard to message youth. And what we're seeing is a clear distinction between ages 16 to 19 and 20 to 24 in the fatality database. And lastly, the proactive enforcement that is more data-driven needs to be optimized. Tactical analysis to guide assessment, planning, and operations, particularly for large rural areas where there may be less enforcement, but a wider geographical area to cover. So based on these takeaways, we've created a series of outputs that we are hoping will help the communities. And these will be available for download before the end of the year. And it is a free resource. So the first is a fact sheet helping local governments assess the impaired driving problem. So this is a series of questions to guide local governments, not only in the collection of quantitative data, but also to help them identify sources of qualitative data. So these sources can provide them with a greater insight into the true magnitude and prevalence of the problem. Alternative data sources have become increasingly important in light of often lengthy delays associated with finding and collecting crash, arrest, and conviction data. Answer to the questions we provide in this document can help municipalities ensure they don't mistakenly overlook or underestimate the priority of impaired driving. Some of the things we suggest are, for example, looking at the number of trained standardized field sobriety test or DR drug recognition experts within the community, the number of enforcement activities that occur annually, the frequency and availability of buses, taxis, rideshare, and other alternate transportation options, because the number of these things may impact the number of the perceived priority of impaired driving and eliminating that within the community. We've also created a community survey toolkit. And again, this is designed to have more current and relevant data specific to the community versus relying on national data that may be delayed or may seem not relevant to that community. So we aim to combine the quantitative data sources that are available, such as crash data, arrest data, with local level surveys. So communities could create current, clear, and more accurate picture of the problem within their locality and use that to drive change within the community. So we provide guidance on how to identify and access the existing data sources, as well as instructions for building and delivering community surveys. We provide a list of sample survey questions, as well as what each question can, what does it mean? What's the point of asking the question, and what can we do with the answer? So how can we use that data to move forward? We've also provided a list of potential community partners who can support outreach and build engagement within the community. And ultimately, we want to help communities better understand the scope of impaired driving locally, mobilize partners around shared goals, and take informed action to protect lives. And the last fact sheet I'm going to go into a lot of detail on is the community media fact sheet about impaired driving. So this draws attention to some of the ways the impaired driving issue has evolved and factors that have played a role. It looks at new tools being used on the road, their implications for drivers. We discuss how mandatory alcohol screening works and other recent changes to administrative and impaired driving penalties. We highlight the important role of road safety organizations and the media in increasing public awareness about these changes to motivate behavior and change, as well as safer choices on the road. This fact sheet underscores the importance of media outlets and their role, the role of journalists who are a credible authority to educate the public about impaired driving. Seeing a public journal or a local journalist discuss something within your community may bring it closer to home and help inspire change within that community. We also have 3 additional outputs based on the workshop takeaways that we are in the process of developing. And these, excuse me, will be published within the first and second quarter of 2026. So the first is a strategy to deliver cross-professional training for police officers and commercial vehicle enforcement officers to facilitate impaired driving enforcement among commercial vehicle drivers. We're developing an engineering toolkit to help staff, like local government staff, better identify impaired driving and crash data, and a triage for emergency room staff and police services to enable police to get back on the road more efficiently. There's a similar program in Windsor, Ontario, where police officers are able to work with triage staff and hand off the person they have brought in, allowing the police officer to get back on the road nearly immediately versus waiting with that patient for, up to 3, 4, 5 hours pending the emergency room. And what's next for the coalition is we have developed a lot of campaign resources for this month, which if they're not available right now on our website, they will be very soon. I know the blog is available. We've released a blog on specifically women and impaired driving, addressing safety concerns that women have when drinking and how to get home safely. We also have a variety of ads as well. And then in 2026, TIRF will continue to help communities by working with a series of communities to help them use available data sources to analyze the problem. The toolkit that I mentioned previously, we will be piloting that and providing hands-on support to those communities from us to kind of guide them through it and teach them how to use these data sources to address the impaired driving problem. And that is it. I know we have a little bit of time left, but if I don't get to all of your questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to chat with anyone. So.
Okay, awesome. Thanks very much, Hannah. And yeah, a lot of interesting takeaways coming out of the communities. They're feeling the gap with respect to youth and kind of the importance of that issue. And I know Matt from OSAD put in the Q&A that because Matt and I have talked about this issue before, that 20 to 24 age group that OSAD is expanding their reach to look at that post-secondary issue. So I'm looking forward to see what's coming from Matt about that. Certainly on the community front, the one thing they're really struggling with, Hannah, I think you'll agree, is the perception that the communities may have that it's not in my backyard, that it's not in our community. And I know with some of the work we've done with Ariel, with SGI and Saskatchewan's and communities, that was exactly their focus, is really illustrating that. So what we continue to see coming out of the workshops for communities are, how can we be more engaged, but also how can we access those data sources that's so important to demonstrate the problem and to get that visibility for it. So we are at 11:28. I think we've covered a bunch of questions. I would like to thank Steve and Milad and Steve and Hannah for their expertise and for sharing the work that they've been doing at TIRF and at MAD. And I think some of the questions certainly provide opportunity for discussion moving forward. As Hannah said, we will be looking for a cross-section of communities to work with them directly to help them leverage their data. Milad's going to be playing a key part in that, in helping them put data sets together, and Hannah with respect to piloting the survey toolkit to give jurisdictions that real-time current information that's so important to motivate action. We are going to make the presentations available. Again, just a reminder with respect to Steve's presentation that data excludes Manitoba and BC. So we have apples to apples. And once that data comes in and is cleaned, we can update the presentation accordingly. So the webinar recording, Karen, I'm going to look to you. The webinar recording and some of the resources we have coming out, can you just touch on their availability?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely by the end of the day, Friday, if not ideally a little bit sooner, you'll be able to find the recording of the webinar on the TIRF, our TIRF Canada YouTube channel, and we will also post it to the Impaired Driving Coalition of Canada project page. And I can pop that link in an email when we send you the recording of the webinar and links to download the new fact sheets.
And thanks again to our sponsors, to Beer Canada, to Desjardins, and to Diageo North America, who've really been instrumental in making this work possible. So that's it. With that, I would like to wish everyone a happy and safe holiday, and to celebrate in a safe way.